Hey, good morning, Cory. How are you
Good
doing?
morning, Ruth. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Nice to be here.
Good, good. After few technical hiccups, we've got it working. So whereabouts are you?
I'm currently in England near London.
Okay, how's the weather?
Cold, bit drizzly as usual, I'm afraid, for this time of
It's
year.
just such an English question, isn't it? You've got to
Yeah,
talk
it
about
is.
the weather.
Changes every day.
So, Cory, our podcast is called Destination Education, and we're focused on UK education. And I know that you've got oodles of experience, and I'm sure that we'll get into some interesting stories. And I have some questions for you. But I want to start by asking you. I presume you were educated in the UK. Is that correct?
That's right, I was actually. I went to some fairly well-known schools myself. I started at the Dragon School, which is a prep school in Oxford, quite a well-known one, and it has borders, although I lived locally. And after that, I went to Abingdon School, which is quite a big traditional school for boys. And quite unusually, in the middle of that process, I actually transferred and I became a boarder at a very different school called Frensham Heights, which was a more liberally minded school, and it was co-educational. And I spent my time there before finishing in the state sector. So quite a diverse range of experiences.
So, why did you change from Abingdon to Frensham Heights?
That was purely my parents' decision. I think when I was, when you're that age, sometimes you essentially just do what your family says. And so I became a boarder. But I did love boarding. I have to say that for me, boarding, it helps you really grow the characteristics that you want to have as an adult. So things to do with understanding other people, living alongside people, and sort of the ups and downs, but the intensity as well of experiences that build a really opportunity for all the things that you can have at school. So I loved it. I have to say, even now, I don't mind telling you that I'm 54 years old, and I still look back on those times as the some of the best times of my life.
So that's interesting. So we're exactly the same age, and I did not board. I went to I went to a state school for primary, and then I went to an independent, tiny girls' school, which has closed down. So it's interesting. You went to a boys' school. I went to a girls' school. We might talk about that later on.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have sent my children to boarding, and I'm a big fan. Do you have children?
I have four children, so they're quite spread out in ages. My eldest, for example, is 29 years old. And that's my daughter. My son is 26 and is a physics teacher at a school. And then I have two stepchildren, both of whom are still at school. So my stepson is taking A levels, and my stepdaughter is doing GCSEs.
Oh, right. So that's you see, got two going for exams this year.
I know, I was sort of, that's easy, right? Let's do it all again.
I did one after the other. So my daughter did A levels last year. My son does A levels now. He's doing A levels now. So did you send your children to independent school, boarding, or day school, or state school?
Um, so day school, but boarding. Sorry, day school, but schools where I was at. That's what I'm trying to say. So I had, because of my privilege, my career is in education, and I started my education in state schools, and I was 8 years in a state school. But then I actually went to be a housemaster at a boarding school, and then I went to America, and then I came back to Britain and was 13 years at Box Hill School. So when I travelled to different schools, essentially my children came with me and went to those schools.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And you've had experience in working in both state and independent. I mean, what do you see as the key differences? There's the obvious things, but your insights.
Well, that's a really interesting
Question.
question. Yeah, it's a crucial question. I certainly think there are great people in all sectors. So there are good people doing good things. The I would say that in terms of independent boarding schools, one of the key features is just the range of opportunity. There's so many things going on. I love the 24/7 cycle of schools that have things in the evenings and at weekends as well. And of course, class sizes is a huge difference. I think you can absolutely have, I mean, my son would be having lessons with just two people in the class in his sixth form, or in a GCSE, you might have 12 people studying, French or something. But when I was a teacher in the state sector, I had 34 people in my class.
Yeah, I
So
think
it's
it's
just a lot
a big
bigger, and
difference.
it's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah, someone was telling me that they had a class of 38 children, or that their child was in a class of 38 children. It was just crazy big. I didn't realize they were that big still.
They are, and it obviously depends on the class and it depends on the school, but it's got that sense of organised chaos. So when I was teaching, I had to just give, you're giving 30 seconds to each child and teaching to the group, and I do find that you can build a lot more in terms of relationships at some of these smaller or private schools, and that's one of my passions is this idea of developing. You're not just kind of teaching your subject and throwing it out there. You're developing relationships that help people learn. My passion as a leader, my passion as an educator is always about looking at how people learn and grow and get better every day.
That's an interesting point. I suppose those large classes in the state sector, actually we sometimes talk about what drill and kill, or teacher talking time. It's really one to many, isn't it? It's just delivering content, and there just can't be an awful lot of time to check, how each child is digesting that information, what extra support they might need, or any differentiation within the group. It must be very difficult for one teacher to cope.
It's challenging, and I think it does rely on obviously the skill of the teacher. You're right; it's very challenging. It's also tremendously intense. That group will leave the room, and you normally have just 5 minutes before the next group arrives. And one of the funny things, when I was a French teacher by trade, that's what I did before I became a leader. And so you'd be teaching a young group of 11-year-olds and talking about basic vocabulary. This is a pen. And then moving on, the sixth form come in, and then you're discussing French literature. So the jump between in just a few minutes between the different levels and standards is also very interesting.
Let's take a quick break to talk about something that can make all the difference for your child's educational journey. I'm thrilled to share that this episode is sponsored by Top Schools, your trusted partner in navigating the complex world of school applications. If you're aiming for a top independent school in the UK, Top Schools offers personalised consulting to ensure your child finds the very best fit with a guaranteed outcome. From identifying those best fit schools to crafting standout applications to invigilating the entrance exams, the expert team is with you every step of the way. Ready to take control of your child's future? Visit topschoolsadmissions.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more and book a consultation today. Use the code DESTINATION for 20% off. That code is DESTINATION for 20% off personalised support for entry into a top independent boarding school in the UK. Now, back to our conversation.
If we have time, it would be really interesting to talk about the teaching as a profession, and what's happening nowadays with the new grads, but I'm not sure if we'll have time.
I know, there's a lot there. Yeah,
we could talk for hours, but something you hinted at earlier, and I want to understand, as a school leader, obviously you start off as a teacher, and then you're good at your job to the point where you're no longer teaching. So you led a boarding school that was Box Hill, right, for over 10 years.
yeah.
And as a leader, what's your, if you can distill it into a few words, into a nutshell, what's your leadership philosophy?
Perhaps I might repeat myself and say opportunity. So that's huge. I was massively motivated by what I call global citizenship. So the idea that's why I really loved working in the international boarding sector, because bringing people together who wouldn't otherwise meet and learning from each other, I think is really important. I would also say that I love the idea of holistic education. So for those who don't perhaps know that terminology, it means you're educating the whole child and the whole curriculum. So that means that citizenship, getting out into the open air, doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do in terms of expeditions and trips, they're all part of learning about yourself. And I think it's really important to sort of know oneself, to understand how, I mean, I focused a lot on brain learning as well, so how the teenage brain develops and therefore how you can assimilate knowledge, and then from there, sort of trying to maximize that. So I suppose it's quite a liberal philosophy that I have. I'm not hugely bound by the tradition and school uniform and things like that. I'm much more focused on the importance of character, bringing people together and understanding what your own definition of success might be.
I mean, yeah, opportunity and holistic education. Do you
Yeah.
think the whole child bit, do you think that's what's really missing in a state school when you have such a large class?
Yeah, I think, we didn't talk about finance. So, the funding to do the things that would be exciting sometimes isn't there. I know teachers who buy their own rulers for the class, for example. It's things like that. And I think they should be provided where possible. So I think if you are restricted to that extent, then you can't do everything you might want to do in the way that I've described, to expose people to as many opportunities as possible. But I do want to stress that in every school, there's great people within the resources that they have coming up with fantastic ideas. And I've seen it. I've been a governor of a state school. I've seen it in all the different sectors.
Yeah, but it's within the framework, isn't it? Within the politics.
Within what's possible, yeah.
Within what's possible, yeah. I want to ask you, I mean, obviously it can't be plain sailing running a school. What size was the school that you ran?
Medium to small, so about 400 students. So, obviously you've got big schools that might be 900 or 1,000 in the private sector, and you've got smaller ones as well.
Yeah. What was some of the, I don't know if you've got any sort of interesting or funny stories, or I'm trying to think of what were some of the toughest decisions that you would have had to have made as a head?
Well, I could write a book in one sense. I mean, there's so much that goes on. And I think the role is changing over time. It's not the same role it used to be even 10 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. And it is true that you're more of a CEO, you're running, a multi-million-pound business as well. And so important financial decisions and everything else. So, but some of the traditions still remain. So you're looking after children, you're dealing with parents, you have sometimes quite challenging, conversations as well. But you're managing change and development. If you don't change, you're like a stick in a river, you get swept away. So you have to keep pedaling, keep thinking, moving with the flow or against it sometimes. And so bringing your own ideas to develop the school, sometimes physically, building buildings that you think are important. And when you have resources in any business, it's the allocation of those resources. Are you going to spend money on teaching staff? Are you going to build something? Are you going to invest in opportunities for the children's experiences? And you want to do all of those things, but your budget is not limitless. So you're choosing where to spend your time and money. But I remember one time, because of course everyone gives you advice, and people are saying, well, I think you should do this, I think you should do that, and everyone has a different piece of advice, and you can't please everybody. So you'd have to be single-minded. But then there was one time when I was committed to knocking down some buildings, and I remember standing at my office window and looking out, and the bulldozer literally just kind of pushing them over, and they all collapse. And I was thinking, right, well, I hope that was the right decision, because I can't go back from that,
You're having second thoughts, yeah.
You can't second guess yourself.
I mean, I talk to a lot of heads, and I also work with parents myself. And I guess it's a little bit of a strange dynamic that we have a young person within our care. We're looking after the direction or the growth, as you say, of your pupils. But the parents are paying the fees, and you have to deal with the parents as well. I mean, what do you prefer? Do you prefer interacting with the children, the young people, or the parents?
Going to be completely honest with you and say the children. That's where it's at. That I think a lot of teachers would say that because they surprise you and they can delight you. And actually, even when they're challenging, it's you're always looking for ways that you can help because you know that child is on the journey to becoming an adult. And actually, that's part of your job is to guide, to correct, to give them an environment that's quite, sort of tough love. It's like you care, but you're not going to let some things happen. You're not going to let them sort of sell themselves short. So even the discipline can be done in a way that, there's a huge similarity between parenting and teaching. And I think you can transpose those skills. What matters is the child. You put that child first, but it also means that they have to respond, and so you build respect. You can discipline people, and they can thank you for it because they understand you're doing it for the right reasons.
It's interesting you say that. I speak to so many teachers that are not parents. Why do you think that is? Does it put them off being parents? They always say, "Oh, it's fine, it's okay. I have a lot of children. I see a lot of children every day. I don't need my own." Do you see that? Do you find that?
Personally, no, but I think that in terms of obviously it depends on the age. So, for example, my son, it is young; he's 25 or 26, and so the point is he doesn't yet have children, and he's a teacher. So maybe it's about time of life as well. And without in any way commenting on people who don't have children, I think that when you do, it certainly can bring that extra dimension of understanding. You can understand the sort of hurly-burly of a household. And for me, having had, so now 4 teenagers, 2 girls, 2 boys, there is an understanding. I mean, I actually do a parenting talk. It's one of the things I do but I apply the science of neuroscience to understanding what's going on. And one of my mottos, I have many mottos, but one of them is that you are the frontal cortex, but they haven't developed the rational thinking, the critical analysis of risk and reward. If you revise now for 8 months, you'll reap the benefits in 10 years' time. They haven't got that. So you have to kind of impose your strategic thinking onto them in a way that helps them in the day-to-day. And understanding their emotional reactions and the hormones and things like that. It really helps educators and parents because you can get a sense that this is normal. This whole challenging, or maybe this person has kicked off emotionally in front of me. It's fine. There's one adult in the room, and that's me. Right? I'm not the teenager. The last thing that's going to help is me kicking off like a teenager. So I use my adult skills because I'm in a relationship with a teenager. And so I think a lot of people, parents and educators, have to bring that to the table.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because as parents, the cliche is that they don't come with a manual, and we're all just trying to figure it out as we go. And then you think you figured it out for the first one, and then the second one's completely different, and then the third and the fourth. But we tend to sort of draw on our own experiences. And if I think of, how I was parented, I think that my parents did all the right things, but it was a very, very different context. And it was also a very, very different time. I mean, do you think that nowadays, we've got so much of this, we've got the snowflake generation, right? So you're dealing with a child's emotions. My parents would have taken, there was, the ruler on the hand was the least of it. I had the belt on my backside a few times. You can't do that anymore. But have we gone almost too far in the other direction where we're validating their emotions to the point where we have the snowflakes?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I totally agree with this idea that we are living in a different world. So that's how I would phrase it, but I get it. I think that schools are challenged by that because a lot of schools are so living in a different world. They're actually teaching people in the same way and following the same rhythm of the year as they did in Victorian times. You get a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people sitting in rows and being taught and lectured on the same books from a long time ago. And yet the world is changing.
Do you think that's true in both the state and the independent sector? Are we talking in the UK?
I think it is. I think it's true. I think if you go around a lot of schools and classes, you might see that. But to come, I mean, that's another point. But to come back to your point, I think that there's a phrase that I think sums it up quite well. I think we overprotect children in the physical world, and we underprotect them in the digital world. So you see that a lot. I do think more risk, more understanding of how you grow resilience in a young person, which is to expose them to increasing levels of challenge and disappointment, even, right from a toddler being told, no, you can't have that lollipop. They've got to understand what that means and how to kind of cope with the emotion right the way through to major challenges in life. And yet, because we're at this generation where a lot of people like me they grew up without social media, without technology, don't quite understand how to regulate it. And so children are massively underprotected and overexposed in the digital world. And all sorts of things are messing with their minds, and adults aren't helping them enough.
I mean, I feel like there might be some sort of a turning point on a number of different levels or different areas, but I feel like the phones in schools, being given iPads, we might be seeing a change in the tide on that one. What do you think?
In what way?
That we might be starting to reverse that a little bit and taking devices away from them when they're certainly too, young.
Yes, interestingly, I just don't think that taking devices away is the solution, because that you've got to help people understand how to use things responsibly, and also there's millions of people making a lot of money out of fueling your digital addictions, so that's not going to stop. So how do you give people independent critical thought around what they choose to do? So it's more about, again, increasing exposure, and because people are overwhelmed, it's more about, this is what good schools should be doing, teaching about this sort of thing. And what I love about some of the schools that I've worked in is that you can grow independent critical thought in one area, and then you can, of course, apply it in another. So there's a lot of focus. It used to be on knowledge acquisition. Of course, it's not. It's really more about processing now. So you do need the knowledge, but because knowledge is always available on the internet, it's much more a focus now on what to do with that knowledge.
The amount of phone use in schools, in and around schools, outside the classroom. Let's start with outside the classroom. If I visit a boarding school and I see students, obsessively looking at their phones, it disappoints me.
Yeah, I agree, but I think so I agree. We really don't want that. Personally, I don't think it's healthy for anyone. But we have to accept it's going to happen, or at least the society and the people who, the billionaires who control all these things, they want it to happen. So I think what we've got to do is take phones away, yes, not because we just want to say, no, don't use it, but we want to free people up to seize these other opportunities. So normally, the schools I've worked in don't allow students to have phones really until GCSE. And then at sixth form, you can have your phone, and that's a risk, but you're trying to get people to join in lots and lots of activity. And when there's sport and activity and Duke of Edinburgh's Award and councils and committees and things to get involved in, a lot of people will. So that's the way, I suppose, to try to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, especially in a boarding school, they should be so busy, and they're, spending time with their friends, that the phone is the last thing that they want to be doing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had a rather liberal approach. What do you mean by that? What's your definition of liberal?
Yeah, I suppose I should define that, shouldn't I? Because it may not be what some people assume. But for me, it's that conformity to regulations is not the same as right thinking and character. So my focus is on, I called it relationship driven learning. So it's about who are you, how do you behave when people are not there, and do you understand your role in I suppose some of the ideas of duty and what you've got to do to give back, and that includes your community and your school. So I think a lot of people might choose to impose that from outside, and this is what I mean by rules and wearing a uniform and I suppose small regulations. I'm less interested in that than I am about what a person thinks and feels and does. But having said that, I worked in a lot of schools that you've got 400 people. You do need rules. I'm not saying we don't need rules in society.
Yeah, so they have to exist. They have to coexist, right?
Yeah, but each person is different, and therefore, where you can, you are really taking interest in the individual and adapting your response accordingly. Maybe that's what I'm saying.
I think one of the reasons that a lot of parents do like a British boarding school experience is because it's perceived to have some of those traditional values, just basic respect and manners and courtesies. I mean, again, when I visit schools, I like to see that the children address their teachers respectfully, and they're holding doors open for visitors and that sort of thing. So you're not opposed to that, right?
Absolutely not. No, good grief, no. I think so. The idea that we're driven by values is fundamental. So please don't get me wrong. The values that we espouse are really important. And actually, so if you don't have, people are coming from all sorts of diverse cultural backgrounds and different backgrounds, and so we have to understand what is the commonality of right thinking and explore that.
Interesting that you mentioned diversity, because I guess there's one there's one barrier, there's one obstacle to entry into an independent school, which is finances. So we assume that most, and I know that some children are on bursaries and scholarships, but the vast majority of their parents can afford, or they somehow are able to afford the fees. So do you think that do you think an independent school is a diverse community? Is it diverse in other ways?
So that's a good question. Totally agree. We can't really get around the fact in the UK, private education is very expensive. I wish it wasn't, because I think that two things have gone crazy in the UK. One is house prices and one is British education prices. They're both gone up much more than inflation over a significant period of time. And from when I was young, that makes a difference. They are diverse in other ways. Sorry?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was only going to say that you're right. They are diverse in other ways. They make a concerted effort to be to be open to different ability groups and to different nationalities. And for me, that's the key. I can't do a huge amount about the cost of education, but in terms of bringing together people from around the world, literally my goal for my school was, if we could, the Holy Grail would be somebody from every country in the world. And obviously that's a pipe dream. I couldn't do that, but I could work towards it as much as I possibly could, because that's what I want. I want schools to reflect global society.
Well, let's talk about then, a lot of people listening to this are not in the UK, might be considering coming to the UK, so their child in effect would be an international boarder. So most of the boarding schools need the international students for the purpose of diversity and just, creating an interesting and vibrant community. They also need the fees, let's face it.
Sure.
We'll come back to fees, I think, in a moment, because we have to address the elephant in the room. But In terms of you led a school. Tell me a little bit about the international community and how, the composition and how you managed that.
Um, from the one hand, so active promotion always with the philosophy that I had. So I had the pleasure and privilege of, I think I traveled to 23 different countries, 33 different cities over a span of, the 10 years that I was head, promoting the school, meeting parents, working with agents to bring people to the school. And overwhelmingly, of course, when they did, they were tremendously happy. Um, I know they are expensive. We've talked about that, but the point is, what are you getting for your money, and what is the experience? And if you're developing your English language fluency, that's you will become bilingual very quickly. Everything is immersion based. You'll have tremendous support from all your staff. Your house parents will look after you like a professional parent, and the intensity of the relationships that you forge is this thing that, when I said that my schooling still is the happiest times of my life in my memory, it's this idea that you're living together, working together, playing together all the time. And when you do that for 3 years, it's this intense relationship that you build with everybody that lasts a lifetime, as well, of course, as the learning and the focus on your studies and the help that you're given and the careers advice, and then these amazing trips and experiences where you can travel the world or at my school, just as an example, we were actually one of the founding members of the Round Square community, the family of 200 schools around the world. And one of the last things I did before retirement was we hosted the International Conference on the Environment. So every year this takes place in one way or another, different themes. And 1,500 young people came, and there's so many that you can't really host them in one establishment. So we took over Oxford University. Everyone descended on the university. We had Queen's College and operated our section out of that. And the sort of extraordinary dynamic and vibrancy that takes place. And you're exposed to keynote speakers and all of this, hosting events. And the young people were doing this. I was there as a sort of guide, but really the young people were doing it all. And it's the skills that it gives you for future life, you can imagine in business and everything else, it is second to none as well. So these are the things that you're getting for the experience.
Yeah, and they'll remember those
Oh yeah,
trips.
yeah, absolutely. Well,
Do you
absolutely.
still have friends from your school days?
Absolutely, yeah. I not only obviously on social media, but just dropping in on them around the world as well. And so when I used to travel, I'd try and connect with my friends who were overseas as much as possible.
Yeah, you should just talk a little bit. You mentioned the Round Square, just very quickly for people who don't know what that is.
Well, it was founded by Kurt Hahn and a group of schools who shared back in the 30s, so about 100 years ago or nearly, the idea of, I suppose, what I've been talking about, character education through outward bound pursuits that take you out of your comfort zone. So when you're a young person and you're halfway up a mountain in a tent, that was quite new at the time. That was, it was different. And it exposes you to these kind of challenging experiences where when you, of course, get down safely and you have this wonderful experience in nature or whatever it is, you feel great about yourself and you understand. The phrase that he used was, there's more in you than you think. And once you realize that, you won't settle for anything less. And so this idea of allowing young people to understand there's so much in them brings this amazing self-confidence out. So it started small with 8 schools. It's now 200 schools around the world that share a common philosophy.
Yeah, and there's an association, right? So a lot of schools have this logo on their websites.
That's right. You can find them in all sorts of different countries: America, Ghana, the UK, Germany, of course, and many, many other places. The Round Square. It's other schools do different things, but that's what my school did.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that, so we've talked a bit about the fact that it's expensive, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But do you think the children who attend a private an independent school in the UK, do you think they're somewhat living in a bit of a bubble?
As far as possible, people try to burst that bubble. We all create bubbles around ourselves anyway, don't we? You know, our friendship groups and things like that, and the people we mingle with, and at work, the work we do. So, to a certain extent, there's that is inevitable. But I think schools do a lot of work to make sure that there is an understanding that with, you know, a degree of privilege comes responsibility. But I think also to try and get people to understand community. And for me, my motivation was always to say there's different ways of giving back. And if you define success as, you know, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to run a successful company and generate productivity and income for your community. And then you can be an employer of people and give people jobs and give people sustainability. And there's different routes to giving back. And so, I don't think there's any harm in being productive as long as your mindset is correct.
Yeah. I mean, I've hinted at the costs a lot because we're heading into March 2025, and in January 2025, for the first time, parents were paying VAT on top of school fees. So it's been much discussed and debated.
Difficult.
I mean, what are your views, Cory?
Well, as I said, I mean, British education is expensive. I mean, all boarding education, whether it's in Switzerland or America or whatever, is expensive. And the world has changed and things have got more expensive, and I think we have to accept that. Not a huge fan of the increasing costs being put on schools. I think the key thing for I think clients to understand, this is really important. A school will be taking in millions of pounds in income. But let's just, for the sake of maths, say, let's imagine that's £10 million income. Their expenditure will be something like 9.9 million. It's really important to understand that schools do not operate this massive profit base around giving money back to shareholders. And in fact, one of the things I dislike most about the VAT concept and what the government is trying to do is that I think it's going to stop schools being charitable organizations and generate a for-profit mentality. So the schools will carry on, perhaps become more elite, not less elite, and create profits. What schools are currently doing is they're not charities in the same way as like a cancer charity would be operating, but they operate this idea that you bring in a lot of money and you spend it all on the children. And so 10 million comes in, 9.9 million is expended, and you are doing all these opportunities. You know, there are schools that run kind of Coast Guard services, and I met a school that has a fire engine and things like that. And it's spending money on, yes, great stuff, but it's spending a lot of money. You're not giving, your school fees don't go to a school, you know, where somebody makes a huge profit. You're paying to reinvest in the education for everybody, and you're part of these experiences. And I think the challenge for schools now is, you know, overnight they had to find £200,000 or more operating expenditure out of a budget that was already tight. So I don't think people properly understand how tight the budget is, and therefore why schools are charging the money that they are. So whether you think it's fair or not, that's why they're doing it.
Well, they would be deciding on whether they think it's fair or not based on what they know. But when you say people, who do you mean?
Well, I think generally when I ask people, you know, schools publish their accounts in the UK online. You can see their finances. They are for public record because they're charities. And when you look at them, a lot of people don't look at them. But when you do, you can see that their profit, you know, their surplus is low. And this is the point I'm making. So and when I say people, I think just most people I speak to, you know, whether they're clients or not, don't understand that concept of very small surplus, and everything therefore is income in, expenditure out all the time.
Mm. So you're firmly on the side. You said you were not a fan, right? You would, if you were
I'm not a
pierced
fan
money,
of
you
what?
wouldn't have of the VAT.
I think that the current government has a more idealistically motivated reason for doing what it does, and I don't share those ideals.
What do you mean idealistic?
Um, I don't think the current government likes independent schools, but I think they have overlooked the fact that they need to reinvest much more. In other words, the fault is not independent schooling. The fault is many years of underinvestment in state schooling.
Hmm. Yes, interesting. Do you think that it's going to go all the way and go through, and we're going to have to live with this for the foreseeable?
Yes.
It's depressing, isn't it?
Challenging. Yeah. Because even with a change of government and therefore more support for the independent sector, which is a fantastic, firstly, cutting edge in terms of education anyway, and, the, building on the traditions of the past, but hopefully embracing the technology of the future. Um, I just think that a new government coming in would never then close down what is obviously an income generating scheme from a previous
Mm,
government. So they might do other things, but they won't close it down. It's here to stay.
yeah. From a purely selfish point of view, I have one more term left. But what I don't understand is how they can tax education for for children under the age of 18, and yet they're not taxing higher education. I just don't get it.
Well, anyone would think that they were idealistically motivated against a certain type of school and deliberately not biting other hands that feed them. But of course, I can't comment.
So we've already seen some schools closing, unfortunately, a lot of the smaller schools. It's a real shame. Yeah, it's a sad time for the independent sector. Do you think
I would. I'm going to change that word to challenging. It's a challenging time, and I think some schools may close, but more likely you'll see schools innovate, and in particular, probably join groups. So, two things I think will happen: schools will join. So, independent schools will join larger groups of shared ownership. So that is brings economies of scale and greater revenue, and a successful school can prop up a school that's more challenged.
yeah.
That will happen, and I think also you'll see schools transfer out of charitable status and be bought by investors. And whilst that might mean that they are operating differently in terms of the children's experience, it will continue.
So if they are, I mean, we've got those large groups like Duke's Education or Cognita, Nord Anglia, that they seem to be buying up schools at a rate of knots, and they do have so some of the profit presumably does go to shareholders in those groups.
Um, I don't know enough about it to talk and give an opinion. I know that I have worked in schools that are owned by venture capitalist investor groups, and that is
Mm.
for profit. And again, I don't think really the children's experience is a negative one. Um, they operate differently, and at the top in leadership, you have perhaps different pressures. But all schools are under pressure. All about they are businesses,
Mm.
whether they're charitable businesses or not. That they operate with the same business imperatives that other businesses do.
Mm. And do you think back to the idea of international borders? Do you think that's just going to become inevitably a focus for many schools? They're going to have to rely upon more international students, and if so, does that mean they're going to be lowering the standards potentially?
I don't think you'll see a lowering of standards. I think you will see schools actively seeking to recruit boarders. I always did that anyway,
Mm.
but I think that other schools might join in that process, maybe schools that didn't before. And but in terms of the standard of delivery, it's very important to keep that high.
But not all schools will have the luxury, will they? To be honest.
Well, I think you have to cut your cloth accordingly, so things will potentially change. If what you're saying is, will schools that would have been very selective, would they loosen that selectivity and have other types of person? I think potentially some might and some might not. So again, I think it's quite, unique to the school situation. Each school is in a different situation.
Yeah.
Quite historic schools might have 500 years of endowments to draw upon, and new schools don't. It's quite different.
And what we're also seeing, we started off. You said you went to an all-boys school for a bit. I went to an all-girls school for a bit. That's still a very interesting debate. I was just talking to a couple of heads of girls' schools. We're seeing quite a lot of those schools, particularly boys' schools, that will now take girls. Why are they doing that?
You'd have to ask them. I know what I think, but I may not be right because there'll be different motivations. But essentially, I think that two, maybe even paradoxical, maybe my two opinions are in conflict. I don't know, but personally, I'm a massive fan of co-education. I think that boys and girls together at school can be tremendously rewarding and successful. As an educator, I love that, and I like schools to reflect as much as possible real life, and that is real life. So yeah, massive fan of it. That's where I want to be. Interestingly, I actually do, though, recognise that schools that really get it right and think very carefully about single-sex education, I don't think it's a hindrance, even though I'm not a fan of it. I don't think that the boys and girls are, negatively impacted by that. And they will say it allows them to concentrate on different things. And so, if people are getting it right, single sex and co-education can work.
So why would a number of those traditionally boys' schools now be taking in girls, do you think?
Either the new head or new leadership is a convert to my way of thinking, where co-education is to be lauded and reflects the real world, and or brings in more revenue.
Yeah. Do you think, you went to a boys' school for a little bit. I was, and there were different times, let's be honest also.
Yeah.
Very different times. I've spoken to a couple of girls' school heads, and they would say, one of them said she believed that the research bore this out, that girls learn better in girls' schools, whereas boys learn better in co-ed schools.
Well, she may have an interesting point, and I've been in schools that have experimented with having co-education but different classes, and having had girls and boys as children myself, I can see why there is this argument about distraction and so on. And also, when you understand team development, you will know that girls tend to learn in different ways and mature earlier by about a year. So their developmental growth is a year ahead of boys, and boys, they learn in different ways. They're quite last minute with their revision, for example, whereas girls, this is a stereotype, but there is truth in these stereotypes that girls learn differently. So the argument that you can arrange your curriculum accordingly and play to the strengths of your cohorts, I get it, and the fact that girls might have a softening effect on the boys, that's also relevant, because when boys process through the teenage brain, they go through the amygdala and process emotionally, and girls actually, different parts of the brain are active in different ways at different ages. And so, for example, they're better at revision and memory at those key teenage years. So personally, I actually think that the school system favours girls, because it's probably set up in a way that girls learn better for the current exam system. It's not that girls or boys are better, full stop. It's just the way they learn and the way the system works.
You mean with the high stakes public exams at aged 16 and 18?
That's right.
Yeah. If you were advising a parent, I had one this morning actually that she said to me she favoured a boys only school for her son, and what sort of conversations do you have with parents around that decision whether to look at a single sex school or only consider a co-ed school?
I actually haven't had that so I'm now a freelance consultant, and so I work with schools and agencies in a different capacity, and I haven't had that conversation with anyone. No one's asked that question. When I was leading a co-educational school and people asked that question, I would simply just talk about the benefits of co-education. I'm respectful of anyone's decision to do otherwise. So really it would go back to my earlier points about why I think co-education can be a good thing for all concerned.
I think I've decided, based on a lot of discussions that I've had in the last, I was at an event last week. I used to ask the parents, do you prefer a girls' school, boys' school, or a co-ed? I'm going to stop asking that question and present options of both. And then, I evaluate each school on its own merits. So that's something that's on me. It reminds me of years and years and years ago. I used to ask mother and father, and I got I got taken to task on that by a two-dad family.
Okay.
So I had to change it to parent one and parent two.
Yeah, there you go. You see, yeah.
That was about a dozen years ago. Maybe I was slightly ahead of my time.
Yeah,
That's a whole other conversation for another time.
for
And
sure. Yeah.
probably just, I don't know if it's worth. Well, actually, I mean, you were in a co-ed school. I don't know whether to go there. Just about whether or not the whole DEI stuff. I can't think of a better word. Do you think independent schools have been slightly more reluctant or more reserved in their, acceptance of a lot of those policies and procedures and how to run a school as compared to the state sector?
No, but I mean, 20 years ago, things would have been very different. I actually think schools are quite pioneering. There's huge amounts of effort go into the policies and programs of a school to promote, everything that is laudable about diversity and equity and so on. So actually, I think it's pretty good. But in every society and group, the thing is, schools themselves are responding, to societal pressures, and there's a lot of conflict in with the broader society. And so what's happening is everyone's at home being awash with what the media does or doesn't think, which is volatile. And then they come into school, and they're young people. And you see it with parents as well, who are not young people, actually. But the point is, you're bringing all these people together. So it's nothing like that is the school's fault. The school is the receptacle of this melting pot and does its best to, over time, generate an understanding and right thinking around these matters. So I think schools are doing great work. Where they fail, it's not the school's failure, it's society's failure. They're bringing it in. That's genuinely what I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we could. We won't. Go.
Yeah.
Let's not go
I
in
know
that
it's
direction.
controversial. I'm sure I'm setting myself up for various comments, but hey ho.
No, you haven't been controversial at all. Please
But
do.
not, okay, good. Well, I'm making myself clear at least.
Um, we will. We've been going for nearly an hour. We will wrap up. Just you mentioned that you're now freelancing. You did about 10 years. What was it that led you to move on from Box Hill?
I think this massively changing world and changing forces within it. So I have huge respect for people who keep going. And, when I was running a boarding house, I did 7 years as an example. And for me, there was a shelf life to that experience of getting up at 2 a.m. and, intervening, good or bad, in terms of running a house. I had 73 teenagers in my house every night, on duty. And I think there's a time when you think, actually, do you know what? I'm going to change. And so I think after 10 years of running the intense school that was really changing all the time because, we had COVID, don't forget, and all of those changes as well. So it was more about a personal decision to step away from the intensity of that role or that lifestyle, which really is 24/7, and to do something where I am much more autonomous in the projects that I choose, like this conversation, and the ones I don't choose, or choose to manage my time differently. In that sense, I'm semi-retired.
Okay, but you left the school in January, is that right? That's an odd time to leave.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's. I think, I won't say too much about the process, but I will say that I approached the executive, the governors, a little bit before that. Well, a year back, and was saying, let's talk about transition. So I think in terms of timing, it was what's right for me. The school year is a funny one anyway. Why wait until September or whatever? So I think school. Don't get me started on that. The entire rhythm of the school year is Victorian, and we should be perhaps more flexible.
Oh, please do.
I actually had a really interesting conversation with the head very recently about looking at how a school, why. I mean, if you're talking about learning, why do you go away for 9 weeks in the summer, where children forget a lot and come back in cold? And actually, could you not be doing more in August? And again, probably controversially, I used to be a huge advocate for a 4-day week, but a shorter holiday program. So you don't go away for these 9-week sessions, but you do perhaps have longer breaks at weekends and things. And we could do school differently if as a society we chose to, but we don't.
No, that sounds amazing. But why an independent school presumably could do that without, with agreement from its community, its parents, governors. But isn't it the staff who are going to object to that more than anyone?
Well, it's interesting. People don't like change. So that's the major factor here. But even if you had a group of people who would be really open to change, I think it's about what does that change look like. People want to be able to go away. I mean, within my family, we had this discussion recently. Wouldn't it be great if our longer holiday, firstly, wasn't 9 weeks, 4 weeks would be fine. But if it was at Christmas, and that's because the winter in England is cold and dank, wouldn't it be great if you could go away to the Southern Hemisphere for 4 weeks at Christmas and then come back? So you get the summer in Britain and you winter overseas. I mean, that just feels like it makes sense for the 21st century. We don't need to go into the fields and harvest crops anymore.
Yeah, and that's what the current academic year is based on, right? It's the agricultural, the season.
The agricultural, right. This is, in the age of AI, we still let the children go so they can harvest crops, which is very strange.
What would it take to change that? Or what would it, even one school in, one by one, what would it take to change that? I know that people are obviously reticent to change, but change happens, change is inevitable.
If I'm very practical, if you had some really free-thinking governors who approved the idea, and you had the money to take the hit, because initially some people would leave you, some people would think it was too radical, and your income would drop. But of course, if you could sustain that and afford that, then you would build up a new clientele and make a new radical name for yourself. But I'm just theorising.
There are no schools that are doing that in the UK at the moment.
Well, not that I'm aware of, something that radical. I mean, small changes, yes. But, who knows? Let's see what happens next. Perhaps if people are... Hey.
4-day weeks and shorter holidays. Love it.
That is 100% what I've advocated for the last 10 years. You're great. If it happens, we can call it the Cory Lowde effect, but I don't think that it's going to. But yeah, I mean, I just think teacher burnout is a real thing, and it would help with that. So I think it would help with the children get tremendously tired. But a radical over, it's why I'm disappointed with it. Every time the government tries to radically overhaul education, it falls way short of the what could be done.
Mm. The other, I mean, in terms of the structure of the term, and in a boarding school typically would have exit out weekends or leave out weekends where they chuck everyone out of school for, in during the half of the half term. Is that an outdated pattern as well?
Yeah, I don't think many schools do that. Some might, but most schools I know have come away from that. So people still leave in the holidays, like the half term break, but most don't have exeats. If they do, they have voluntary exeats, so people tend to stay anyway.
Yeah, I don't know about most. I'd have to do the
Yeah,
research.
that's right. We need to know the stats.
My sense is that most have exeats, although especially since COVID, quite a number of those that have exeats are making them like flexible, like they can actually stay in school, things like that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my children's school have them, and
Okay.
it's just been, and with no flexibility at all. Even during the A levels, in the May exit is causing me a great deal of anxiety at the
Well, this
moment.
is the thing. It's very difficult for parents. Clients don't like it, and yeah. Personally, I do think a lot of certainly all the schools I know don't do it. But
Mm.
when I say I know, the schools I work with, let's put it that way. But I'm sure some schools still do. But hey, I'm not sure.
So tell us a little bit more about you. You mentioned like what you're doing currently, and where can people find you?
Yes, so if people are interested, I run a organisation called Cyrano Education. That's because I'm a French teacher by trade, and Cyrano de Bergerac was one of my favourite plays. Um, but people can find me online, Cory Lowde, Cyrano Education, and what I currently do is I work with families, but mainly through my network with agents. So, I'm doing some work with agencies who place into British schools, and I work also with schools from the other side of the table to bring students in. So, yeah, basically operating in the field of my expertise with agents and with
Yeah.
schools.
And so we'll put some info in the show notes, but basically, I think if people want to get in touch with you, we can introduce you.
Absolutely, that would be ideal, yeah.
Do you work with French families? Do you find that the French, I know that some of the schools, particularly the IB schools, are attracting some French families. What's your take on that market?
Certainly would work with French families, and I have done in the past. My summary of the market is that stereotypically, whilst, for example, a lot of German families are very interested in British education, French families are less so. So the Anglo-Saxon educational model is less appealing to French families in general. And I also think that that's because perhaps French society has a more egalitarian state system and fewer private schools, and certainly not in the British tradition. Might be more religious private schools if they are. And I also find that different cultures and countries have different kind of abilities in English, and so French people come for shorter periods of time to learn English better, and that's their motivation.
Right, right. What are some of the pockets of, when you were running Box Hill as well, we obviously see quite a lot of students from certain countries. What did you see?
Yeah, it used to be sort of the big five, but of course, with us, this idea that trying to get somebody from every country, we're trying to, always trying to branch out.
What were the big
We were
five?
running the A level. We were running A level and IB, so it was a lot of students from Europe would be interested in the international baccalaureate, whereas students from maybe Britain, of course, Africa, Asia would be more interested in A levels. I mean, that varies, but that's again another stereotype. And those would be the areas that we drew people from more than the Americas. Although I'm hearing that there are more people in Central and Southern America
Central and
interested.
yes. Yeah, we're getting inquiries, I think, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and even Chile
Yeah, that's what I'm
seem to
hearing. Yeah,
be up and coming. So
that's
let's
good.
see.
Yeah, that's good.
What were the big five that you were mentioning earlier?
Pre-COVID, of course, it would have been China, Hong Kong as a separate area of China, Russia, Spain, Germany.
Right. Yeah, different times.
Different times. It has changed since then.
Yeah. Right. We need to wrap up soon, but I have a
Yeah.
few interesting questions for you.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Okay.
you're thinking on your feet.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So, if you were me, what question should I have asked you that I haven't yet asked you?
I think we've talked for a long time and we've covered huge amounts. So I don't, to be honest, it depends on what you expect your audience to be interested in. So,
Well, if
because
we would do this again, what would we talk about?
I think that what we haven't focused on is the entry process into British schools.
Yeah.
So, and when you talked about what I do, and I talked about working with British schools and working with agencies and so on, one of the central things I am also doing is preparing families for the process and preparing young people for the interview experience, which isn't, it's not like the world's most difficult interview and you're not being tricked and being caught out, because schools are kind and they want to work with you, of course. But I think in terms of understanding and in terms of preparation, vocabulary, ideas, and confidence, when we work together to practice that, I think that's 100% client satisfaction. So it's something that your clients might be interested in as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we usually do find that even just a couple of sessions, it can help. But it's not something to be afraid of. And as you say, most schools, well, some schools are definitely not looking to accept all of the children that they interview, but most are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, depends.
All right. And finally, we've talked a lot. I mean, we're fans of the independent sector in the UK. We've been through it. We've sent all of our kids through it, and we're talking about it. We've talked about it for over an hour. But nothing's perfect. So what is wrong with the UK education system today?
I think we probably have already touched on it. So again, wrong is a strong word, but what could be improved would be the school fee structure. It is incredibly expensive, and by driving out people who used to be able to afford it and now can't, you are changing the dynamic, and I think that's unfortunate. I think there's a lot of people, if schools could be less expensive, would benefit the community if they were at these schools. So that's something that it would be nice if that could be changed, whether it's through sponsorship or some other deals that could be arranged. And then the other thing is, I think schools need to be more radical in looking at how young people need to be prepared for the future. So being too traditional in their pedagogy and in not embracing artificial intelligence or whatever it is, I think people need to look seriously at that. I'm not saying they're not looking at it, but being more radical more quickly, it would be nice to see that.
And presumably that would follow through to university as well. Or do you think that in the next, or however many years, that children will still be going to university as they are expected to do now? Certainly from an independent school, they would almost all go to university.
This is a big bugbear of mine, and we don't have time to talk about it. But put very simply, I think universities should radically rethink what they're offering. I think the days when you do a 3 or 4 year course and the excuse is that it's all part of the experience, people can't afford it anymore, and they should be offering shorter, more intense courses. I did a language and business course, and I used to have 1 or 2 lectures a day. I know that if you're doing pharmacology, you'll have a day full of experimentation with science, but if you're doing these other humanities, you could make a 3-year course into 2 years and save a lot of people a lot of money. I don't think universities are motivated to do that.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to have you back on and we'll talk about that.
I'll get some strongly worded emails if I do that. But there we go. This is just my opinions, of course.
Of course, yeah. These have been the opinions of Cory Lowde. Thank you,
Yes,
Cory.
Rachel.
It's been really super interesting. We could have talked for longer, but we'll put in the notes if people are interested to get in touch with Cory, we'll let them know how to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Been really interesting to talk. And yeah, I'm sure that we will exchange ideas in the future as well.